So a little over 2 years ago, I uploaded a video listing my top 10 favourite games of all time, and aside from it being very awkward and cringy, it wasn't entirely honest either. I slapped together a paragraph for each of them trying to force myself to sound interesting and not really talking about the games themselves. So what I've decided to do this time is to split the list so I can talk a little bit more about each games and why I like them. And to be completely honest, the order of this list doesn't represent order of preference. Each game's offered something special in their own way, and apart from number one, all of these games are on pretty equal footing in my eyes. So let's try this again. It's my top 10 games of all time, currently. Final Fantasy X was one of the first Final Fantasy games I'd ever played, and was the first RPG I had ever played. I was watching my friend play it when I was 12, and it was one of the most kick-ass things I had ever seen. I knew the game existed, but as a preteen with ADHD, I didn't have the attention span to sit still and play a game that asked for as much commitment as a Final Fantasy game. But seeing Final Fantasy X with the colours, the world, the music, them big-ass swords, I had to play it. So I borrowed my friend's copy as soon as he was done with it, and I was hooked. It was the first time I'd ever sat down and played a game that wasn't jumping about on platforms and collecting X amounts of thingies to beat a level. I was learning weaknesses to exploit, looking for secrets in every area. I was grinding enemies for experience and AP. I was carefully planning what I wanted each party member to learn when leveling them on the sphere grid. And when I learned that everyone can learn all of the magic and abilities, it blew my mind. I went back after and I played through Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, and it spiraled. I got into other game series like Shin Megami Tensei, the Persona series, Suikoden, Rogue Galaxy, Dragon's Quest. Final Fantasy X was my gateway drug into RPGs, and there have been some amazing RPGs since, but nothing will top the initial feeling of wonder it brought me as a child, and that's why it's on this list. Now, I know in the last list I put Silent Hill 2 here, and most people who see this will cry heresy, but hear me out. After replaying both, I realised I had more fun and was more invested in Silent Hill 3 than I was with 2. Now, I don't want to undermine the fact that Silent Hill 2 is an important game, not just within the horror genre, but with how video game narrative is seen as a whole, showing how escalating the psychological aspects can affect the player as much as the gory parts and the monsters can. The psychological horror aspect of it as well can completely affect the story. It might make you believe one thing for a vast majority of your playtime, but then completely flip that notion on its head. It really did set a benchmark for all other horror games after it to follow. But here's the thing, Silent Hill 2 is a separate story from the first game. It's not a direct continuation. 3 is. 3 has 2 characters that were introduced in the first game, Harry and Heather Mason, with Heather being a reincarnation of Alessa, who was one of the key characters in the original story. Now, I don't want to spoil what happens to Heather discovering her motivation to start her journey to and through Silent Hill, but with it being linked to the first game's plot, it really helps immerse you in the world Silent Hill 3 presents. Even when you're not in Silent Hill proper, the world it puts you in is rich with lore and mystery, and it makes you want to discover what's really going on behind the scenes. Heather is a more relatable protagonist, being younger than James and Harry and being less experienced and more overwhelmed than both before her. But the voice and motion capture performance given off by Heather Morris really does help to sell the fear and confusion Heather would be going through, all while living in this traumatic situation she got roped into. Now, it also helps that Silent Hill 3 doesn't take itself as seriously as Silent Hill 2, which again isn't a bad thing. The themes of Silent Hill 2 and its plotline were dark in nature and also near on being a masterpiece, but with an emphasis on slightly lighter tone. It helps the game in its downtime, it lets your brain refresh, but it also gives it time to come up with all these situations and creatures and monsters that you might face in the next experience as you walk through this nightmarish atmosphere. It's just a shame we'll probably never get another Silent Hill game, let alone a good one, that isn't at the very least attached to a pachinko machine. Breath of the Wild was a lot of firsts for a lot of people, inside and out of the Zelda community. In that list of firsts is an almost unanimous decision that this is one of the all-time great Zelda games. It goes up in the pantheon, standing tall and proud next to Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. And unlike the many Zelda games released over the last 3 decades, it was loved and well received from launch. and for one good reason. This is a bloody good game. Nintendo really wanted to drive home that feeling of a vast ruined land to explore with all these little nooks and crannies and secrets and references to discover, and they nailed it. Hyrule has never felt both lived in and as desolate at the same time. Ganon won. He destroyed and overthrew the entire Hyrule Kingdom, and now his minions are roaming the land, harassing the many other races and tribes and towns through the land. And as ever and always, you are Link. Actually called Link this time now. As for another first in a series, this game is voice acted, which now has other characters calling Link by his name, which in the first time in the entire series cements his name as Link. And after a 100-year spa session, Link now has to traverse the barren kingdom and fight back hordes, kill robot land squids, and rescue the 4 Megazords to blow up Ganon once and for all and rescue Zelda. Armed only with, well, whatever you pick up really. There's no permanence with the inventory and items available like previous games, with a fairly controversial mechanic introduced in the game. Weapons and shields you pick up now have limited durability, so forward planning on what you take into battle is now more prevalent than ever. I personally like this. It makes for some really tense moments when you're fighting something like a Hinox or a Lionel, and the last spear you have in your inventory shatters in your hand. It makes you think on your toes and forces you to improvise. It's not just fighting you'll be doing in this game. There's lots of exploration. There's 120 shrines that have a unique puzzle inside each of them. There's like 900 Koroks to go and find, to go and get seeds to upgrade the amount of inventory you can carry. There's different food items you can collect for recipes for different stat boosts. You can buy a house and renovate it. You can build an entire fucking town. There's something for everyone in this game, and I love it. It's just a shame that they replaced actual dungeons with the 4 sacred beasts. And outside of a unique gimmick to each of them, they all feel the same in terms of like layout and level design. And the boss fights in each of them as well are just a different form of Ganon with a gimmick. And that's the only real letdown here. But everything else this game offers more than makes up for it. The last game I'm going to talk about in this part is Spyro 2. Gateway to Glimmer for me, Europe and Australia, and Ripto's Rage for everyone else. This is probably the most nostalgic on the entire list. It was the first game I ever owned on the PS1, and it's also the first game I ever completed 100%. This was the kind of game you would have seen me playing before trying out Final Fantasy X. This game had everything a 6-year-old bonehead would have wanted. I get to play as a purple fire-breathing dragon with big-ass horns that can fly. I can visit all these different hub worlds and smaller worlds and portals to go and see all the different creatures and people who inhabit and live there. I can collect thousands upon thousands of gems to fill my treasure hoard, mini games, silly side characters. I can blast enemies with some badass power-ups. I can swim without drowning like a doof. There's cool secrets tucked away, and then visiting Dragon Shores at the end of all that for another sweet-ass reward of visiting a fairground, only to discover there's more cool shit to do there and to get. When the Reignited trilogy dropped last year, I wasted no time immediately jumping straight to the second one, and I even shocked myself as to how much I actually remembered in the several years since the last time I'd actually played this. The remake was like seeing the game again for the very first time, but instead of remembering how good it looked, the visuals now matched my memory. Toys for Bob absolutely smashed this one, and I can't thank them enough for doing it so much justice. This game has stuck with me my entire life, and I will never forget it. So that's it for part 1. I hope it wasn't as cringe-inducing as the first one. I'm going to get straight to work on part 2 now and get the next 4 games and the honourable mentions done, because number 1 is going to get its own video, because I have a butt-ton to say about it. Thank you again for watching, especially if you watched the first one. I'm sorry. But stick around for part 2 when it's up, and I will see you later.